Welcome to the Bells I Hear podcast. We will speak with experts who will debunk the myths and misconceptions surrounding homelessness and highlight the innovative approaches for addressing the issues, causes, and consequences of housing insecurity. I am Elisa Smith, your host, a mentor, professor of legal studies, and former public defender. Thanks for tuning in to the Bells I Hear.
Hi, I am Hiro Patel as host filling in for Elisa Smith. Today's conversation is about belonging, what it means to feel safe, supported, and seen. That's especially true for LGBTQ plus youth and for young people in Latin and Hispanic communities. I'm joined by Daniel Reyes. We'll be talking about identity, community, and the importance of support systems for LGBTQ plus and Latin youth. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really glad to have you on the show. You spent decades working across New York City and beyond, from food access and youth services to mental health, advocacy, and policy. I mean, that's a lot. Well, before we dive into your broader work, I want to know your journey. What first inspired you into this work?
Honestly, I came from an immigrant family. We came from Mexico, and if it wasn't for really kind of pivotal people in my life who helped guide me, I wouldn't be here today. And started my journey really. Um, being guided by teachers mostly, who were very helpful in understanding my identity, understanding who I was, and encouraging me to continue on my education journey. And that's kind of where things kind of got started for me. And as a result of that, one very instrumental teacher in high school really inspired me to start my career as a high school Spanish teacher. She was my Spanish teacher, so. So really that's kind of how I started my journey. And after a few years of teaching, really kind of moving into youth development and youth services was something that was just really resonated for me. And so throughout the course of my career, many of the roles that I've taken have really kind of mirrored pivotal moments in my life. So I grew up from, my family didn't have a lot. We experienced a lot of food insecurity, housing insecurity, a lot of just financial challenges, and being able to kind of have those support systems, and then to kind of follow my career trajectory to allow me to do those things and kind of work both at an individual level and at a systems level to kind of change things is really kind of how this has all kind of happened for me. So, working in supportive housing, working in food insecurity for many years, advocating for young people, for immigrants, and LGBTQ individuals, both young people and adults, has just really been. Um, I guess in many ways a privilege to be able to do those things and to be able to kind of like move in a way that I've been able to engage in meaningful work that it both is aligned with myself and my own personal mission and values and the mission and values of the organizations that I've worked with.
I love that. And I love how your story is just very inspiring because it's not one of those things where it's easy. There are so many young people, and just even older, like just adults who have a really hard time, not just kind of, figuring out their identity and just coming out, but also support. And the fact that you have that support is very um, inspiring. So I just want to know how do identity and culture shape the way LGBTQ plus people experience support, or the lack of it, especially in Latin and Hispanic communities, because it's different from what a person that is, a person of like non-color may experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that especially for young people, I mean, it was many moons ago, but I do remember being a young person and just the weight of the world that you can feel on your shoulders. It's like you're trying to figure out your social circles, you're trying to figure out your identities, you're trying to navigate school and family. And sometimes when you're in those dynamics, add on to the layer, operating often like in, especially for Latina youth, you more than likely are from an immigrant family where your parents, this is their first time in the country, and so you're kind of like navigating, operating with a foot in both worlds, right? And so that was my experience. It was very much, you want to be, you want to kind of like meld and be a part of the community that in the exterior, and then there's this whole other kind of dynamic in the interior of the home. So I often would joke to people that when I was a kid, we my parents were very much like, be American, so let's like kind of assimilate as much as possible so that we don't stick out. And so it was very much, we would eat sliced bread outside of the house, and there would be tortillas inside the house, So it's that kind of thing that you as a young person are kind of very keenly aware of. And then add onto that, not quite sure who you are. You feel different, and yet you don't want to be different, and so it can be very challenging. And so I think it's important that young people have the supports that they need, because it's not always a positive experience, and even inside the house, young people can have supportive parents who, as they come out, they can tell them, and they tell them that, well, because you're my son or my daughter, I love you. But then they're in the same house and they can hear very kind of homophobic or transphobic things that are, it's kind of like, well, I'm talking about those people over there, not about you, my child. But it's still impacting the young person in that way, in not a very positive way. So I think it's can be very challenging for a young person, and to be able to kind of navigate that it's a lot, which is why, I think, young people, especially now with so much access to information, are just being bombarded with so many different things that they're just struggling sometimes to just wake up in the morning, and I think that that's something that can be very challenging. And then add, so it's like very much like you're a young person. On top of that, you may be queer or trans or questioning, and then add on to that you're Latino, or you're Black, or you're African American, and it's just like all of those compounding factors kind of can make it difficult to navigate the world. And then often, so it's about like trying to find, as a young person, you're trying to find your space, and then the people around you have to kind of have those eyes wide open to know that you yourself are, some days you're not okay, and some days you are, and that can be really difficult for a young person.
Yeah, especially with like I like how you kind of mentioned like like just being part of like the community, but also being like Hispanic or even Black, someone of color, and those two issues are their own issues itself. So you're right, like with that kind of like combined together, it makes it into more like a situation where like okay, like kind of like what I do, especially with everything that's happening right now, with politics and like
Yeah.
opinions. There's always going to be different sort of opinions and perspectives. And yeah, it does kind of make you wonder and question, kind of like, am I doing the right thing? Like, like, am I supposed to be this way? And it's a very difficult thing to really just, I think, just process. What do you wish that more people just understood about being part of the LGBTQ plus community in these sort of spaces?
Yeah. I often say to folks that, you're not just one thing. You are actually a whole person, and a lot of and these are all pieces of a whole. And I think it's important to understand that. It's I think that it's I guess, the thing is that it depends on which direction you're looking into the mirror or into the looking glass, um, from someone who is looking at an individual. It's important to see that person as a whole person. It's not just a trans woman, or it's not just a non-binary individual. Yes, that is definitely a piece of who they are, but they're more than just that one thing. And I think, you know, um, it's far too easy to kind of strip away people's humanity and to just see this piece of them, and to kind of, um, not think of them as anything other than that. And as an individual, when you are experiencing that, you yourself are the queer young person, and you're experiencing that. It's hard to see that you are, yes, you are that, but you are also, um, uh, a student. You're also an immigrant. You're all of these things. And so, it's important to understand that we have to see each other as whole human beings, and we have to believe, that we ourselves are whole human beings. And young people navigating the world, that can be just hard to see. And I think it's important that the people around young people are able to see that, and that young people are able to see that in themselves, because I think that is how you're able to kind of give yourself the space to kind of explore and challenge yourself and grow, but also be able to receive the supports that you need from the people around you. And I think, um, it's like you come out to your parents, right? And you tell your parents, Mom, Dad, I'm gay. Well, that is one thing that's different, but that's still the same person in front of you, right? And I think it's important to kind of remember that the person revealing a piece of themselves does not change the entire wh- whole of an individual. It just adds more texture to who they are as an individual.
I like that you mentioned all this because I feel like another issue that a lot of people kind of talk about is, um, I guess, when is it appropriate to really have that conversation? Not just about um, the identity, their identity, but also just anything in general about, you'll always be kind of like accepted of
Mhm.
whoever you become as you get older, right? Um, I know from our previous conversations, you mentioned that you have kids.
Yes.
Um, how do you have these sort of conversations about like acceptance and identity and belonging? In what age? Because I've heard like two different sides of like what people think is appropriate age, and what is an appropriate age.
Yeah.
So for you, um, what do you think is the right age to really have these conversation?
Yeah, so I have my kids. I have twin boys. They're 8 years old, and they have a big queer family. So, they have, two moms, myself, and I'm married, and my husband, and we've all kind of been helping to raise the kids together. And so that in and of itself, everybody knows that Diego and Andres have two mommies and a daddy, and and we're in the school, we're everywhere. And it's not like the kids don't live in New York City, they live upstate. So it's not as though we're living their environment is, this multi-diverse community, and so I think that, um, my approach has been very much treat to not treat things as, how would I say this? I don't want them it's not I don't want them to not see things, and to not experience things. So, in many ways, when we were raising the boys, when they were babies, we tried not to be gender normative, to give them the space to gravitate to what they wanted to. And so they had all kinds of different things around them, and toys, and and whatever they gravitated to is what we wanted them to have. And you know, granted, they're very much like Transformers and trucks and everything now, and now video games, but it's also very much thinking about things like saying to them, there's no such things as boy toys and girl toys. It's just toys. There's not girl clothes and boy clothes. There's just clothes. And so really kind of driving that message home to them that, you don't have to kind of put things into these little neat buckets. That's okay. And and when I have the boys and we go to events that, like, they're community events that, I worked at the LGBT center, and when we sponsor events and there were happen to be street fairs, I would take the kids to those things, to those events. And you know I don't want them to not see things. So, if, like, we're there and there's a trans man colleague or a trans woman colleague, it's not like really saying that this is a trans woman. It's just like, this is so and so, and so really making sure that they kind of just see things as I guess, matter of fact. It's not like it's an issue or it's a thing, and so I just tend to think that I don't want my children to live some kind of, like, some things are meant to be they're meant to be sheltered from. I don't think that that's healthy for them. And so, they ask things like, so, Javier is your husband. I was like, yes, Javier is my husband, and they try to understand that, but, they're young. They don't really know what that all means, but they know that they have a mommy and a mama, they have a papa, and they have a Javier is what they have. So, I mean, so they kind of know those things. And I think one time I was sitting with my sons at breakfast, and my one son told me, or said that he was he thought we had a weird family. And I go, why is that? And he said, well, because there's just so many of us. And I said, yep, that's true, mijo. I said, it's because you have a lot more love around you, because there's a lot of people who love you. I said, and some people have that and some people don't have that. And it was just very much like, okay, papa. So I think it's just, my position is, as we kind of encounter these things, we talk about them. But I don't know, and I want my sons know that, a man can marry a man can marry a woman can marry a woman. They know that, they see it right in front of them. Um, but I don't know if they understand what all of that means. But as we move along, we explain it to them, and I think that's kind of the way that we've been approaching it, and I want to continue to do that. I want my sons to feel free to tell me whatever, and create that space where they do, and they talk about all kinds of different things, and then sometimes there's stuff they say that I'm just like, you know what? I just know you don't know what that means. So we're gonna go past that,
Yeah, no, but I just love that you can have these sort of conversations. It's an open conversation. And yeah, you're right. Even though they may not understand like the complex aspect of it, but at least they're kind of it's that curiosity. And I think for kids, when they ask these sort of questions, that's when they not only are they learning, but it's just the thought of like, you know what, I appreciate you just asking me that question and
Mhm.
being curious enough to wanting to know, because that just kind of like means that they know like something is kind of either weird, off, or however they may describe it, but they just want it to make sense. Because I'm sure when they go to school or anything like that and they see like their friends, right? Their friends may just have like a mom and dad.
Mhm.
And then they look in, their household, it's, like, well, my household is completely different. I have like two moms and two dads. What about you? Um, so these conversations are like just really great to have, and I'm glad to hear like you guys are able to have these sort of conversation. Um, However, there are those who don't have those conversations. So what are the risks that when that support isn't there for them?
Yeah, that's really hard, honestly. And I think that's when when young people, and this is, my work at the center, the center youth was the number of young people who were basically rejected by their families, ejected from their homes. It's astounding. I guess as a parent, I just can't understand how you could do that to your child, um, even if it's challenging for you as a parent that you don't understand it. Um, I dislike when people say they don't agree with it because it's just like, well, it's not really something for you to agree with or agree to, but I think that's when the ability for any individual, but especially for young people, to kind of form their own kind of support system and support structure is really important. And often in places like uh, LGBTQ youth serving organizations is where many of those young people find the space to understand who they are, to get the support that they need, and um, and also to be able to kind of create, those are the providers as well that can also talk to the parents, and I think it's not just kind of like ice out the parents. It's really very much like, let's all talk, let's try to figure out what this is, and to remind the parent that, this is your child, and you do love them. So, I think it's important to find a way to kind of like understand what's going on and to support the young person. But if that doesn't happen, and it does happen a lot, it's really ensuring that the young person has access to other supports, and and that's not just like, it doesn't mean like, um, it's not just all clinical things. It's also just really kind of finding the place to be in an after school setting where there's other queer and trans young people, where you all are kind of like exploring and learning together. And that really makes it possible for the young person to flourish. I think, suicide rates for young queer people are really, really high, and I think you know it's being exacerbated by what's happening at the national level, and just the conversations that are being had, with just the level of vitriol that's just kind of pounding their ears, is it's adding more to it, and so it's really, really concerning. But I think it's important that um, um, adults be on the lookout for young people, and that young people are able to kind of find the resources that they need and the outlets that they need, especially when there isn't that support system at home, which sadly is quite often.
Have you had like do you have any experience where you remember someone who was kind of you know um like rejected from their parents and in that sort of situation and they had like nowhere to go?
Yeah, that happens a lot, and yeah, we've had that's actually more common than than you think. I think the good thing about where the center is and where these young people are is that we're in New York City, which is a little bit different. The situation is a little bit different here. So there are places where the young people can go. One of the largest providers for young people who are have lost or been rejected from their homes or unhoused is the Ali Forney Center, which can really triage the situation. The city also has its own kind of unique system for young people, and Yeah, and even a more of a like very specialized track for like to provide immediate housing for LGBTQ young people. So those things do exist. They're not completely perfect, but it's often the case that a youth worker is able to kind of triage the situation and make sure that the young person has a place to sleep while we work to find them a more permanent solution. Depending on the age of the young person. Um, uh, it could be more challenging, which means that challenging in the sense that, we're as kind of like as youth workers, we have to also kind of notify and the administration for children's services, which then kind of compounds the situation a little bit. But because it then becomes, it could be that the parents then have a very negative reaction to that, and then just make the situation more difficult for the young person. So, but it is something that does happen, and we, um, there are providers that are able to kind of triage that for young people. I mean, uh, that's not always the case though. And even at the center, the number of young people who basically, 15, 16 years old have come from Ohio on a bus, and the center is the first place they go to. That is more common than most people think. And um, it's challenging and it's distressing because, the young person felt so isolated and so in danger that they left their home, or they were thrown out of their home and they had nowhere to go. And so the thought is to go here and you're in this massive city alone. You don't know anything. You don't know anyone. And, the only thing you know is that you've heard about this particular place. And so that's a very scary journey for a young person. And the number of times that that's happened at the center is just, it's a commonplace experience. And it's actually very sad to know that that's a commonplace experience.
I was just gonna say that it is like scary the fact that you even just mentioned that it's so common and it happens more than you think, which it really puts a lot of just perspective in the issue itself. Um, Something we love to do is pause during each episode to clear up some sort of common myths. I'm going to just throw a few statements at you,
Okay.
and I'd love for you to tell us if it's true or not and just
Oh,
explain why.
okay.
So, my first question is, some people believe that being LGBTQ plus is something young people grow out of. What would you say to that?
First I laugh, but you know, I think that is people are evolutionary, right? We are all growing and changing and adapting. And, you know, a young person is even more so in that space, but even, you know, so I don't necessarily know if one, that's not true. You don't grow out of anything. You grow into something else, perhaps, but you don't grow out of things. So, and, um, and I think that, you know, you as an individual can say, "Oh, I love red," right? And then later on in life, as you get older, you're like, not, I think I like green more. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden you hate red, right? But and so I just feel like that's kind of it's false, and I think that um, to kind of it's just not something, I just don't believe that, and I think that people need to have the space to kind of grow and evolve and be who they want to be in that moment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So it's like you're not that thing all forever and ever and ever. You may have an opinion about something at one point, and then as you get older, you think about it differently. That doesn't mean that the other opinion was wrong. It's just that your opinion has evolved.
exactly. I know. I love that whole like you evolve as just a person in general, you
In
know?
general, yes.
Um, Another thing we hear is that LGBTQ plus youth in Latin or Hispanic families don't need extra support. The family and culture are enough. what gets misunderstood there? And I know we talked a little bit about just um, family dynamic and a little bit of that culture itself.
Yeah, it is true. Many Latino families are very caring and, um, even like my coming out, I was very fortunate, because like this is a very common, like Latina mom response. It's just like, "You're my son. I love you. We'll figure it out." Yeah, but the challenge is that, and maybe because I came out, I was 21 already when I had come out, so I was a little bit older. But it's not as though all of a sudden the parents and the siblings in the household are aware of everything, right? So often it could be the case that which can make this very challenging to both be Latina and to be queer or trans, is that it still can be the unspoken thing, and it's like the unspeakable, and because it's not something that's spoken about, it's really hard for a young person because you're not able to kind of talk about the things that you're experiencing. It's more like, "We love you and we accept you, but let's not talk about it." And so that can be challenging. I mean, even in my family, when I was doing this, it's just like, having to kind of like educate the family, there's a learning curve for everybody, right? And I think having had the space to kind of know more of who I was before I had actually come out made it a little easier for me to kind of help with the education piece for my family, but that's not always the case for everybody, and especially a young person, who's also still just kind of evolving in their identities, evolving in their kind of like navigating the world as in their brownness and navigating the world in their queerness, that's a lot. So, and to not have that support or to kind of like operate in this space where we just don't talk about it can be really hard for a young person.
Yeah, I actually heard of that. I actually had a friend in college, and she was telling me the same thing about like, yeah, my parents like they know, like they're okay with it. However, we don't really talk about it. Like it's not one of those things where like we can sit down and watch TV or something, and it just comes up like like the conversation. Like
Yeah.
nothing. They know about it, but it's never kind of
Yeah.
talked about. So
It's just
yeah,
not
no,
common. It's not common in
yeah,
many, like, immigrant cultures to talk about sexuality, gender identity. That's just not stuff that's generally talked about, you know?
yeah.
It kinda gets equated in this very antiquated way to sex, and
Mm,
because that's an off topic, then all the rest of the things that kind of emanate from it are off topics as well.
right. No, I love like that whole explanation to the question. Um, there's also this idea, if a young person has food or a place to sleep, everything else will work out. Why isn't that true for the LGBTQ plus community, youth facing instability?
I mean, yes, I mean, obviously, having the things to survive is still not flourishing, right? So because you have a place to sleep and food to eat, doesn't mean you have the supports and the space to flourish. That's just. I think that that's important to understand that just because you have the pieces that allow you to survive doesn't mean you have the pieces that allow you to flourish as an individual. And often young people, like LGBTQ young people, they don't have that. Even if their parents, like if like in a Latino family, if like their parents accept it, they just don't talk about it. They have they have their home, they have food, but they don't. There's whole pieces of themselves that they're unable to kind of express or be able to share, and um, that can be compounding on a young person's mind, and really lead to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, all kinds of things. And so I think it's important to know that, like, yeah, even if they have, we all have, even if you have the things to survive, it doesn't mean you're flourishing. And I think that's what's important to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about LGBTQ young people.
Yeah. I like that your experience also, you work like just both inside systems, policy and funding and government too, and directly with communities. Where do systems tend to fall short in this scenario and Latin youth in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think uh I think that I think what ends up happening often is, and this is something I think, and maybe it's more because I'm a parent now, but I think that often systems, even like governmental systems or the nonprofit sector, whatever, they're trying to address a thing, right? And not understanding that it's not just a thing, um uh s- so like when I worked in emergency food for many years, you know getting somebody a food bag, a bag of groceries, kind of address the immediate, but it doesn't address what the issue is. And so often it's just like, the issue is not just that this person doesn't have food today. It's just that this person doesn't have food for this doesn't there's no different. There's this bag today, but that doesn't mean there's something beyond that bag. And so it's just like understanding that, like, um the you have to think holistically about this, and I think that that's really hard for like bureaucratic entities to think about it that way. And even in the nonprofit sector, it's just very much like, um let's just focus on this, and that's fine, but it's not understanding the entire situation. And so I think that that's often where we fall short. You know if you're a young person, you're Latina, you're LGBTQ, and you're homeless and you don't have food. Well, that's like five things, and systems are designed to kind of, we can do this, we can do the food, or we can do the shelter. um, and I think there have been movement to kind of shift in that, but that requires public buy-in and public investment. And I think that that's part of the challenge, is just that, it getting people to understand that we have to kind of like invest in all of us in order for all of us to flourish. It can be challenging. There's this kind of like very American ideal of like, what is that? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? I try that. Try to pull yourself up by a bootstrap. You can't do it.
Mhm.
So, and I think the systems have to kind of understand that as well. And young people, um, if the system isn't, if like government systems and nonprofit systems are designed to kind of like address a whole individual, then someone is always gonna fall through those cracks, and I think that that's what we have to be aware of.
Yeah. I feel like, and I've heard like this, like just the conversation in general. I think, honestly, I think it was just a few weeks ago. I was in a conversation with one of my friends, and we talked about the same thing, like about like, sure, there may be some sort of solution. Yeah, that solution for just that moment. But what about next week? What about tomorrow? What about 5 months from now? There is no, like, we need more of that concrete stability and providing for people that are in need. Um, it's such a really tough situation. And, before we wrap up, anyone listening who might be struggling or who wants just support from someone, where can people go to find the help they need? A community or just trusted resources right now?
I would say that, I think two places that I think are really vital is, one, the LGBT Center, and young people can access that by going to www.gaycenter.org. Um, And then another one that is really instrumental is the Hetrick Martin Institute, which is designed for young people. And I believe it's just www.hetrickmartin.org. But don't quote me on that. Um, but I think that those are two places where those are kind of like the portals, right? The way to kind of like access the entire array of services and providers across the city for young people.
This was such a a great conversation, and I'm sure we could have talked so much more about it. But the information itself is so important, and I don't think people really realize how important just not having the conversation is. But like we want to make these conversations reach to like that national level, so people like those higher people can see like, hey, like this is what's happening. You guys might not realize it, but look at these like different sort of conversations that we're having with people who have faced that issue, or know people who have worked within that you know issue itself. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your story and just providing so much more information to me and just the podcast in general for listeners.
I was happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in to The Bells I Hear.
Thank you for tuning in to the Bells I Hear podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the Bells I Hear and follow us on social media. We post all of our conversations on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. You can connect with us on Instagram and post comments or questions that we can address on upcoming shows. More information can also be found on Blogger and Substack. So many ways to learn about the issues surrounding housing insecurity. Please join us and contribute to the conversation.